Hey everybody, thank you for taking the time to join today's webinar. My name is Grace Gill and I'm a business development representative with Ordinal. I'm excited to be hosting our third webinar, Modernizing Government with AI, Startup Founders on Transforming the Public Sector. We've been fortunate enough to sit down with the founder of Ordinal in a previous webinar, but today will be a unique conversation between both Jacob Herrington and the founder of City Detect, Gavin Baum-Blake. This will be a unique conversation between these two who are innovating technology for the government sector. Get ready for interesting insights on the way that AI can impact the public sector. Without further ado, welcome Gavin and Jacob. Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us today. I will start off pretty simple. Can you both introduce yourselves and give us a 45-second elevator pitch for both City Detect and Ordinal?
Jacob, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll kick it off. I'm Jacob. I'm a software engineer by trade, but I've been kind of leading sort of our growth and strategy here at Ordinal and working on kind of getting us to market. Really short elevator pitch for what our product does and our tool does. Basically, we go into cities, we look for processes that are overly complex, that have sort of breakdowns around communication and really like approval processes, review processes, things where large chunks of information become a bit of a bottleneck when you have to go retrieve that knowledge. And we try to provide cities and all of the employees and the individuals working with that city access to an AI research assistant that sort of democratizes access to all that knowledge and makes it easier to self-serve and solve questions that today take weeks possibly to get answers and maybe a few minutes. That's kind of our primary focus. It's really about simplifying complexity.
Awesome. I'm Gavin Baum-Blake. I'm the CEO and co-founder of City Detect. By trade, I'm a licensed attorney in the great state of Alabama. And we actually started City Detect. Basically, we're a computer vision company, and we put cameras onto different types of vehicles. And as they're going around, we're actually doing full-on surveys and property analysis, finding different instances of blight. So that might be graffiti, illegal dumping, illegally dumped tires, litter, housing decay, all of the things that kind of deteriorate a community at large. And so we work with public works departments as well as code enforcement. And it's really interesting because we're able to leverage already existing assets in those spaces, whether those are trash trucks or street sweepers or code vehicles. They don't have to do anything different. They're just driving around, and we're able to flag issues throughout the community so that then they can go out and abate those. We have prioritization elements as well, and they're able to get heat maps and really quickly and objectively find where issues are. So that's kind of our bread and butter in the data collection space.
Very cool. So Gavin, tell us a little bit deeper how you're innovating urban planning. You're saying that you use current assets, but is there technology already in use in this process? Or are you introducing technology to this space?
Yeah, this is a kind of transformative way of approaching it, right? Because the vast majority of municipalities, they'll have code enforcement officers who, for those of you who don't know, right, code enforcement is the kind of municipal counterpart to homeowners associations, right? They exist to make sure that the housing stock is really, really well preserved and that cities are maintained and are continuing to be beautiful. And it's kind of this like multi-departmental approach, right? So code enforcement is most often specifically focusing on private homes, whereas public works will be focused on the things that are in the right of way. And so really there's a lot of municipalities that they don't proactively find these issues because there's not a great objective way to go out and do it. And some of them are purely reactive. So they're responding to constituent complaints or leadership complaints. And with us, adding this proactive element, you're able to go out and really have kind of the evidence of exactly where it is. Everything that we do is based around pictures so that you can see, oh yeah, there's an illegally dumped pile of tires that are down the road in this specific place, and we show them where they are. And then they've got a prioritization map and they can get routes to each of these different places. And so it's just been really interesting to get to work with some really high caliber partners who have been able to put their own thumbprint on the technology that we're building.
Yeah, that's super interesting. How did you identify, one, that this was a problem, but then two, that you and your team kind of had a unique approach to solving that problem?
Yeah, so our founder, Dr. Eric Johnson, he has been doing urban economics for like 20 years at this point, and he's actually been doing computer vision for the past 10 years. And his deep research was really surrounding identifying like property valuations based on their like aesthetics and their kind of and also their proximity to urban amenities like parks. And so we were having conversations with the city of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and just about, hey, Eric, this awesome research that you've done, could you also apply it to the municipal context? Because housing surveys take a ton of money to go out, and then they get stale after even, a month, and then you can't really action it. And so from our perspective, we were like, okay, we could build this company that basically, picks up all of this data, but it also has these priorities that we're able to build into it. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. It started as a kind of class project, well, professor project, and turned it into a business.
Yeah, that's awesome. So similarly, Ordinal is adding technology into the city planner process. So Jacob, can you share with us how Ordinal helps these city planners also become tech-enabled?
Yeah, actually, there's probably a really great synergy here with City Detect. So if you think about City Detect and its kind of role in the organization, like that, really think like data and how it flows through those organizations. City Detect is collecting a lot of data. There's doing a lot of, it's mostly visual data through like videos and images and that kind of thing. And they're doing analysis on that data and they're surfacing that data. That's really where we kind of come into cities in general. City planning especially is a big place, but also city managers, finance departments, economic developers, anybody who is going to be consuming the data that folks like City Detect are collecting, right? And you can have a technician who can operate that software and be really effective and come to some really cool conclusions and analysis. But you also have, a wide city staff with a wide level of technical competence as well as like interest in technology. All have different goals and different purposes, and they may only need like a surface level from the data that City Detect is collecting, but they read a lot of like in-depth information from maybe the city ordinances or like codes that are adopted in those ordinances. And with a tool like Ordinal, we sort of sit at the bottom of that data funnel, and then we can pull data from platforms like City Detect, but also GIS, and then just text documents and sort of your library and your archives of records, and then synthesize that into some kind of analysis that's really easy to access for anybody, regardless of their technical skill. So a really clear example would be like if you were to call into a city and say, hey, I want to add 4 townhomes to the housing market here. I have a lot picked out. I know where I'm going to do it. I have 4 or 5 bedrooms, this square foot, whatever it is on these townhomes. And then asking, do I need a fire suppression system or can I get away with smoke detectors? Or like, what kind of concrete can I use on this construction? Or if I want to put in an extra wide driveway, what steps do I need to take? Do I need conditional use? Or if somebody in here is mixed use, we want to put a bar downstairs and an apartment upstairs. What do we do to get that done? That kind of information can be synthesized very quickly out of a tool like Ordinal that just sort of takes different data sources and then builds answers that are rooted in references from those data sources. So it's a completely different part of like the technical stack, but it's also really synergetic with like ideas like City Detect, where you're collecting data all around your city, or any other platform where what you primarily do is collect data and then need a human to parse through it. We just kind of help out and try to be a research assistant in those spaces.
Yeah. So for both of you guys, it sounds like the focus is not only collecting data and but also having access to that data. So can you both kind of share from either of your perspectives, what is the importance of having accessible information for municipalities and how that will progress them as a city?
Yeah, so I can start off, right? We've had several use cases that we've kind of developed over time. One of our great partners, both, I would say City of Stockton is one of our favorite customers, right? They're incredibly innovative. They're entrepreneurial with the way that they approach it. Their director, Almarosa Vargas, has done a phenomenal job of really kind of being a leader in this space. And it's one of those things where when you adopt technology and you adopt AI and you try to have efficiency gains, not only does the code enforcement department get better, but it also opens up opportunities for the public works departments and then the city council, who they care and they want to make sure that the city of Stockton is beautiful because they're members of their community and they're leaders in that community. And so not only does it enable each of the departments themselves, but it also enables the leadership to have a direct view into kind of what's going on with a pretty objective eye, kind of throughout their own district, throughout the city as a whole. And so it enables them to then kind of plot out, all right, this is where specific issues are. Here's some of the, approaches that we're thinking about taking to really try and combat some of those issues, whether that's illegal dumping or whether that's graffiti. And yeah, they've got like a phenomenal graffiti response program, and they've got these grants that they're able to go into and tap into for their residents. And so it's just really kind of exciting for us to be able to see like the way that these local leaders are, kind of going above and beyond to make their cities better.
Totally. I mean, I agree with all that. I think it's kind of alarming sometimes, and also just kind of surprising when, we talk to a lot of civic leaders in a lot of cities, and also a lot of sort of frontline staff in those cities. And it's interesting the disconnect between sort of the upper level of leadership and then the folks that are operating the actual city. And I think something Gavin touched on there is like the ability to kind of look in with an objective eye from a leadership perspective and say like, what's actually going on here on the like kind of on the ground tactically. And I think that's pretty powerful. I feel like the phrase that comes to mind for me is democratizing access to data. And I think we do that too. One of our things is, we don't really care how technically averse someone is. If you can use a Facebook Messenger window, you should be able to use an AI tool, right? And so we try to put that in the hands of people who normally are going to be kind of blocked from that kind of objective direct access. And like I said, it ends up being sort of a democratizing action where, like Evan was saying, public works suddenly, with our tool, suddenly public works can answer some of the questions they might derail a director of planning with, or engineering can kind of resolve when they disagree with planning. They might be able to work with an AI and kind of coach through how we resolve these two different interpretations of an ordinance, or really anyone else who has sort of a disagreement. We frequently describe our tool as like a Rosetta Stone between different parties, which is a lot like that idea of democratizing data. If we all kind of get the same interpretation, we're all kind of on the same page, then our conversations are going to be a lot more effective and productive, which is the same as giving leaders access to data, and those leaders then make effective and productive decisions rather than kind of wasting their time trying to get their bearings before they're able to make those decisions.
Yeah. So clearly, Ordinal's acting kind of is as a knowledge base, and City Detect, you're providing kind of measurable insights that are real time. So, what does it look like to work with these city governments? I know you mentioned that you work with coding departments and then respectively planning departments, but it also sounds like it has effects for others. So what is it like to work with local governments, and kind of share a success story with some of the departments that you currently are partnered with?
Totally. I can give a quick example. It's pretty straightforward. Basically, any city that exists between two really successful communities or really fast growing communities is going to be a little bit overwhelmed, because if I'm a business, so say I am Dollar General or even like Costco or something, and there's a highway that I know, bedroom communities are all commuting into this one place. I want to put my retail store, my coffee shop, or whatever it is on that road. Well, a lot of those towns, may have a part-time planner or like a solo planner, or barely have a planning department or planning budget at all. And so when one of those businesses comes along and tries to locate on these highways, you could lose business pretty easily, and that means revenue for your town, because you weren't able to get back to emails in a week, and the town down the road could, and it was easier to build a facility for the business to move into town down the road, and now you've lost out on that revenue. So I think some of the success stories that come to mind are communities like that, where there's just one person trying to answer 300 emails a week. It's just not really humanly possible when answering an email means looking in code books for 3 hours. So I think that's maybe where we have the most is communities like that we've been able to help. I don't know if Gavin has any success stories to share, but I'm sure you do. You mentioned just now, what was it, Stockton? I don't know where else, but
yeah. So for example, one of the, I think, really quick success stories, when you have this kind of data collection, and we're kind of like two sides of the same coin, right? We do the data collection and detection, and Jacob and Ordinal do the kind of synthesis and that knowledge base. And actually, I think there is an opportunity to have a really interesting synergy there. Just kind of a quick success story from us is the city of Greenville, South Carolina, right? They're led by Buddy Skinner and their code enforcement department. Again, they're incredibly innovative as well. And so one of the things that happened was Hurricane Helene hit Greenville, and it was awful, right? But really quickly, what we were able to do was tap into the already existing cameras that are in that community. And as we were going through, we were able to do a full-on housing inventory and find all of the instances of roadside debris and brush that was there. And doing 1,100 miles, we're able to do it like that, right? With image proof and evidence of exactly where these things were. And so it just kind of goes to show when you have that infrastructure in place to be able to identify new and emerging issues, it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'll pause here real quick because it looks like we have a question from the live stream. So for Jacob, is Ordinal considered an authoritative source when implemented, or is it more of a utility to guide decisions rather than provide the final answers or as a source of truth?
Yeah, it's a really smart question because it kind of comes up in every conversation. Frequently people ask us for a public-facing version of our tool, and we do that, but we kind of discourage it because you really don't want, if you think about AI in general and like what large language models really are, you don't want a tool that can't really conceptualize what it's saying to be disseminating information in an authoritative way. Really, you want a human in the loop is the phrase we use, but you want a human who's sitting there with oversight. So yeah, Ordinal can pull a ton of information. It can give you a pretty authoritative answer with references. It can really back up what it's saying, and it doesn't hallucinate. But at the same time, you do want to make sure that there's a human who has a nuanced understanding of the situation, who's probably a member of that community, who's like participating in these conversations. So we try to make sure that while Ordinal is extremely effective and used as a utility for the employee who's answering the questions, we try to make sure that human is still the one making inferences and making final calculations on kind of what actually happens in a community. So I would say it's not intended to necessarily be authoritative in the sense that like it makes decisions, but it's intended to be authoritative in the sense that it helps you make decisions. But obviously the human can override the AI at any point. And if you ever have a system where a human doesn't have the opportunity to step in and say, not sure that's right, you're really kind of setting yourself up for failure with AI.
Yeah, I think that's something, as far as keeping the human in the loop or having some sort of check or, responsible use of AI. That's a bit important, an important topic when talking about AI in any sector, especially in a government sector. And I'll kind of continue to build off of this as we talk about Ordinal. I've noticed recently, Ordinal is really reinforced their focus in the government sector. What do you think makes Ordinal unique for this market?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of folks who are doing real estate AI related things. That's where we started, and we moved toward government because we just realized that when we look at the kind of broken feedback loop that we want to help out with, that the way to move the needle is to be on the government side of the process, just because that's where a lot of the I want to say critical outcomes are determined. Like if you look at the government side of the planning process and you look at what those people actually do, in a lot of cases you can hear these horror stories where communities are like really seriously negatively affected because that role wasn't performed well, or you can hear stories in the inverse where like horrible outcomes were averted because someone was in that position and actually made a good decision for the community. So planners, I always point out that like planners have a huge impact on your life and you don't really know it in most communities. And I think that like that was what drove us toward focusing on government was the number of people who were looking into real estate and trying to solve the same issues we were. And then realizing that those people had kind of missed something we had seen in our product discovery, which is that the real estate developers themselves will, of course, fill a vacuum in the market, but you have to create that pathway for them. And both of these entities want to talk to each other. They want to work together. And that's why we use that Rosetta Stone analogy, is because it's really just about getting on the same page, and that pathway opens up, and then the real estate developers have their problem solved, but you did it by working on the government side. And if you tried just on the real estate developer side, you would be fighting against those government processes, which are there for a reason, and it would probably be like an uphill losing battle.
Very good. So then kind of jumping over to Gavin, we have another question from the live stream. When City Detect uses cameras to detect urban blight and decay, does that information come across as live alerts, or does it get put into a database? Is there a system generated ranking that determines what could be critical versus just general decay or infrastructure?
Yeah, so we do have alerts. So for example, if you want a daily summary or a weekly summary of specific issues, we can get those. There's in-app notifications, but it also goes into the database, of course. And one of the really interesting things is you're able to then basically check over time the way that things are happening. And along kind of those prioritization, every city is a little bit different, of course. Some have significant issues with graffiti, some have overgrown lawn problems, some really care about vehicles that are parked on the front lawn. And so as part of our initialization kind of setup time, we set different priorities and weights to different object attribute pairs. And so we're able to focus really heavily, specifically on the things that the cities and our partners care about.
So for both of you guys, we're focusing on, bringing in technology that helps release bottlenecks and that helps, municipalities actually make decisions quicker and more educated. So on the flip side, though, there's a lot of skepticism for AI or for new technology. Just actually introducing a new process in general, especially if it's been around for a really long time, or if the people in those roles have been doing that process for a really long time. So what are the most common barriers you've encountered when introducing these solutions to local governments, and how have you guys navigated that?
Yeah, I can kind of take it off there. So one of the things for us, especially, the first 10 customers we had, right, was like really proving that, hey, this isn't just a gimmick, right? This is actually something that can be part of your everyday work cycle. It can make your lives easier, it can make your lives and your jobs smarter. And there's an educational component, and there's this kind of constant communication and almost sale that has to happen in between the department or whoever your internal champion is and with upper leadership. And it's, winning over kind of the hearts and minds of everybody involved and all of the decision makers, because really it only takes one blocker, right? And the goal is always to go into a partnership kind of eyes wide open and making sure that they understand, like, hey, look, from a conceptual standpoint, we want to make sure that we're able to, have a net benefit kind of on the whole. Because if we don't make a difference, right, then the company's not going to be successful, the partnership's not going to be successful. And so really kind of setting up what does success look like from the beginning has been super helpful. Enabling the customers early on to see a demo and to see in action and to be able to talk to customers and kind of engage in the community has been really helpful. We've started teaching classes and kind of showing, hey, here's how you can use AI in this space. And it's just been pretty incredible. And, we've been really excited to be able to work in the government space because the mission is so critical, right? Like preserving housing and making sure that like people's home values don't deteriorate. Like, look, my partner and I are both from Michigan. Everyone's familiar with the story of Detroit. And like, we want to make sure that cities are, they're having their fingers on the pulse, and so that they can like keep a really tight eye on the way that things are progressing over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would touch on just like the things that have been either surprising or difficult for us. And I mean, it's kind of the all in the same vein of that idea of like the education and sort of being a little bit of a consultant with your customer. So for example, like everybody on our team goes through some amount of AI training and vocabulary so they can explain things like what is overfitting on a model, what is underfitting on a model, like why would you be afraid of using a large language model for certain problems? Why wouldn't ChatGPT solve this? And then when is ChatGPT the perfect tool? When's that exactly what you're looking for? Those sort of things, they're not obvious, especially if you're someone who's been working with this technology for several years at this point. You kind of know, don't ask ChatGPT to do a lot of complicated math unless you're ready to check it all, like that sort of thing. But when we go into cities, we kind of have to introduce the technology, then work through what the good use cases are, then explain, some things about how to prompt. And our tool is like very self-guided in some ways. There's a lot of education built into it, but there is a huge step for us as even in the sales process, like way before we sign a contract, we will sit down with the city and say, let's write, an AI policy for your city together. Or let's go in and look at some of the vendors you're talking to and sort of analyze their claims and see if you're talking to people who may be making some unrealistic claims with AI. And that's really the danger, I think, is fighting against that sort of skepticism that's taking place where, and a lot of it's earned, where AI is either being put into situations where it's not well suited or it's being sort of over promised, overhyped. And then, the market gets a little bit of a bad taste in its mouth saying like, I'm not sure I want to try this AI thing because we heard about what happened over at company XYZ and how they sort of misled everyone. So a big part of us going to market is selling in a way that's really, really collaborative. For example, like when we do sales calls, I always tell people, ask me how much it costs. I won't try to sell it to you until you ask me how much it costs. I'll just explain this. I'll just talk about AI. I'll answer your questions. And then when you ask me what I want to make off of this deal, I'll start selling the product to you. And usually we have to do that because if we don't start with building the trust and being valuable out of the gate, then we're just starting on that conversation on that kind of foundation of general skepticism toward AI. And we really just need to say, yeah, there are a lot of places where AI does not need to be, and then there are this other category of problems that are perfect for it, and we should be applying it there.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. As you know, you both are founders and you're working on building and scaling a business, but yet still having such a personal mission on education, especially with how emerging this technology is. Whether it's the government sector or not, everybody is going to have to kind of understand AI on some level, and specifically on the level of how do you apply it, when do you apply it. And so taking up the charge to educate your potential customers, but also just your general communities, is really admirable from both of you. Which is kind of a good lead into this question for both of you guys. It's emerging technology. You can kind of label both of them as like an AI tool, but without giving away your IP or getting too technical here, can you briefly describe or explain the technology and how these two technologies differ?
Yeah, I can go real quick on this, and the short version is basically that computer vision is cooler. But anyway, my product that is primarily based around large language models, like that's true. And the more you know about large language models, the better, because they're kind of everywhere now. But it's basically a giant word calculator, and so alone it's not very valuable. It's sort of like if you were to go play with a Ouija board and ask it zoning questions, you might end up with like nonsense, right? Because it's nonsense. And LLMs at the base model are kind of just word calculators that spit up words. So what we do is we put that in conjunction with a few other pieces of technology. Part of that is like vector databases and semantic search, as well as like traditional software engineering techniques that result in like really robust, well-tested software. And then we basically just provide with you out of the box, 80% of what you're going to want out of a knowledge management system, with an AI component that allows you to kind of surface information out of, like I said, 5 or 10 really big books in like 10 or 15 seconds. And that's all based around using this kind of semantic search technology to make sure that we don't miss things, and then also that everything we bring back in our answer is relevant to what you asked. But yeah, it's very different than computer vision. We're focused on text. We're focused on, just really, we're a giant word calculator. We're a giant dictionary that helps you parse through huge amounts of text. Whereas computer vision, right? I mean, we can get to a point where we can do any kind of paperwork, right? We can help you with any paperwork on earth, but we can't do things necessarily that things like computer vision can do, where you're actually literally able to see with a computer, which is crazy. So, Gavin, you can kind of explain the difference, but like I said, they're totally different fields of AI.
And so, like, along one of the things you just said, right, is like it's kind of like a dictionary, but it's also for an LLM like Ordinal, it's also like a librarian, right? So, and part of that is pulling from different data sets. And computer vision, what we're doing, in contrast with large language models or LLMs, is we're identifying different things about the environment using cameras, right? So similarly to how a human sees something with our eyes, we know what an apple looks like. We know what a watch looks like. We know what a car looks like. And so there's different types of AI. One is classification, which would be, is there a black guy in frame here? Yes, there is, right? And then another might be instant segmentation, which would be drawing a boundary around my actual body. And you'd say, there's a person who's represented here. And what we do is a combination of kind of all of the above, right? So we're finding, is there graffiti in an image? Is there a illegally dumped tire in an image? Is there any structural deformity with this roof? Is there an overgrown lawn on this house, right? And as humans, the reason that it takes, so long to do an actual property report, because on average, I think between all of the different clients that we talk to and potential customers, it's usually around 50 proactive property reports per week, because there's an incredibly limited amount of time and they can only really stop at kind of the big stuff. And so some of the other stuff gets kind of passed by the wayside because it has to. There's just not enough manpower typically. And so in contrast with the 50, just with a camera in a couple hours, you're able to go through and do find 2,000 violations. And then once you have all of this data, and you're synthesizing it, we have prioritizations that we're able to focus on. We're able to build out these maps and show them effortlessly where these things are. But also there's tools like LLMs that then you can extract the data that we've collected and you can present it to the customers. And so I know that we've talked a little bit about the potential synergies, but we provide the data, and Jacob does and Ordinal do a really good job of synthesizing and extracting and then presenting the data. Not that we don't present the data, we have some cool, sexy maps and things. Yeah, but that's kind of the difference. And one of the similarities, though, is we also have a human in the loop because Jacob's absolutely right. You don't want to have these kind of potentially rogue systems that are like sending out violations by themselves and like talking with the constituents, because ultimately our tools are exactly that. They're just tools for our partners to use to make their jobs easier. So everything that we do gets reviewed by a person. We've got about a 95% accuracy rate, but AI is not perfect. And I'm sure that Jacob would, kind of echo that sentiment. Like, it's super important to have people who are still involved, who are checking the work, who are inputting their own kind of artistic element on the output, because things change from city to city. And like, so as you build that database up and as you have new information that's available, the actual boots on the ground, the people who understand their communities, theirs are the most important voices. And so we're proud to be working with them.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
such
it's
a good call.
interesting.
Oh,
Well,
go ahead.
I would, thanks. I would call out, like, I think it's really interesting. You'd be hard pressed, I think, in my opinion, to find like a region in the country where you won't find contradictions in their laws and in their ways of doing things and their operating procedures. And so it's a really good example, like with our tool that's based around parsing that kind of data. Uh, we can't necessarily always tell you in black and white what the answer is to a question, because actually in your laws there are three answers to this question. And so that's when the human needs to come in and make a human decision. And to Gavin's point, um, the people who have been doing this work for a decade or two, right, they're the ones who are informed and have the context to actually make that decision when there are those contradictions. So you do need to make sure that you have that oversight. And like I said, I just like the phrase human in a loop, because all of these processes are loops, and it's, data in, data out. People say garbage in, garbage out. If you have those processes where you don't have a human, you're going to end up in the garbage in, garbage out situation, because you aren't giving the oversight to make sure that you put good data in.
Yeah, I think that happens with this new technology. It's so novel that people marvel at its power. But to remind people that it is still a tool to enhance the work that everyday people do, is a really good call out. So that's a good quotable piece from this conversation so far. But kind of to continue on this a little bit more, how do you guys customize your solutions for these cities? Or like, how is it individualized for each of the municipalities that you work for?
Yes, I can kind of start there. Every city is a little bit different, right? So when we're dealing with data sets from South Carolina versus data sets from California, right? Yards look different, vegetation look different, facades look different. But kind of the power of data and being able to generate models using data from all of these different areas, you start to really understand that a roof is ultimately a roof. A door is ultimately a door. They might look differently, but there's always this element of, what does decay look like? What does deterioration look like? Okay, a large paint anomaly is going to be pretty similar generally. A boarded up door or window is going to be similar generally. A tarp that's on a roof, regardless of what like the kind of undertones of the roof are going to look similarly. And then like just prioritization, right? So there might be a city who's dealing with like a ton of fascia and like mildewy area or issues with like their walls. If it's like a high humidity area, and other places might have a ton of vehicles that are parked on the front lawn. And ultimately, that's why it's really important to work with customers and your partners to understand and like to adjust weights and priorities in the system. And so like the output report is going to look completely different, or not completely different, but like substantially different for the things that are popping up, whether it's in Prescott Valley, Arizona, or in Columbia, South Carolina, or in Dallas, right? Like all of these organizations have different priorities that we're able to kind of key in on.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a thing that's going to come up in like every conversation with AI when you start talking about models. Like when people use the phrase model, just for those who aren't super informed on it, like it really is just a series of like weights and biases. Like that's the phrase you hear. It's just kind of how do you want the outcome to lean on this model that does sort of the same process every time. And so, like in our case, some cities may want lengthier answers that surface more contradictions or more complex when they ask a question about a code or an ordinance. And some cities who are trying to maybe put this in the hand of like a front desk person and just get someone's question answered in like 10 seconds, they may want really surface level answers. And they may want their implementation not to dig into nuances, because that's kind of dangerous if you're handing it to people who don't necessarily know how to interpret those nuances. And then for us, like it's every single city is different. Every county we work with is different. Every municipality, because they all have different goals, and that's sort of what Gavin hit on earlier is identifying the goals early. So if you're a county and your primary set of issues has to do with building, a specific type of construction that you deal with a lot, then that's what we're probably going to focus the knowledge base on. If you're a city that's trying to rewrite their entire code and you want to be able to compare your code with like a city like Nashville or like a city that is in your region that you know is doing really well, right? It's a different knowledge base. And so every time we just kind of come in, identify the goals, like any good software should do, and then tailor that software to achieve those goals with like the mechanisms that we use to achieve goals, right? So it's all about saying, you do want obviously computer vision on your garbage trucks, on your fleet vehicles. You want to be able to bring in all this data. But what data are you trying to bring in? What are you trying to identify? Do you have a graffiti problem? Do you have a deterioration problem? Is it something else entirely? Is it natural disaster recovery, like we mentioned earlier? And in our case, is it building? Is it finance? What is it you want to build reports on? What knowledge are you struggling to access? And so every time it's just coming in and having that relationship, asking those discovery questions, and then tailoring the solution to solve those problems.
So would you say, or would either of you have kind of a story in which the technology that you've helped has actually helped a city identify some of these problems? Like for City Detect, okay, they realize that maybe blight isn't the issue, but it's something else. After they get this real-time data, or for Ordinal, they find those contradictions in their ordinances. Do either of you have a story like that?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, with the contradictions, they usually know. So I don't have any great stories where we surfaced like, a huge problem in the laws they didn't already know about. But yeah, go ahead, Gavin.
No, I was actually just going to say almost the exact same thing. So one of the things that we've done are, several ride-alongs with different code enforcement officers like Robert Morgan in Montgomery and, John Pruch in Stockton, and they know their areas. They know the codes. They know what's going on. And so I don't necessarily know that we're telling them anything that they don't know, but we're able to quantify it, count it, show specifically where it is and when it happened, and that's what they're not able to do. Because from a generalization perspective, like they know what issues exist in their communities, right? Like we're talking about having a finger on the pulse. These code officers, they really, really know what's going on, but it can be hard, it can be difficult, and almost unrealistic for them without a tool like City Detect to identify kind of how vast the issue is and to have like specific issue identification like just as quickly as just at a glance.
Yeah, largely the leaders in these communities, from my experience in this project, like they're not pushovers. They know the issues. They know what's going on. It's always a resource question. It's always we don't have enough code enforcement officers to scour the entire city. Like in the same way, we don't have enough planners to answer 1,000 emails a day. Like it's just not in the budget to have those people in those roles. And so they just kind of pick and choose. I had a boss one time that used this metaphor I really liked. He said in some jobs, your job is to pick which plates break, right? You spin so many plates, and it's not so much that you're going to keep the plate spinning as that you have to pick which ones are going to fall. And I think a lot of cities are in that situation where they have to decide which plates are most urgent and which ones can fall because they just don't have the resources. And so, AI is a really good opportunity to make one person more effective here and there throughout the city and actually deal with some of those resource issues without, expecting some unlikely or impossible windfall of cash that solves the issue.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really interesting insight. So I kind of want to touch on a couple of different themes that have been mentioned throughout this conversation, but I'll go ahead and pinpoint exact questions and get an exact answer. What could a collaboration between these tools look like for the cities that are employing them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it. It's about where the data sits, right? So a really easy one for us to point out is, our our tool helps present data, and then Gavin's tool helps collect data. So having that, and of course, it has its own presentation layer. But if you want to say you have some fairly technical people who can operate City Detect and are able to get what they need out of that tool, but then you want someone who, in passing, can just ask a quick query. Like maybe your law enforcement officers want to be able to say, like, hey, is there any new data from this report in City Detect that I should be aware of when I'm on patrol today from like a cell phone, right? You can text Ordinal and you can ask that question and pull data from City Detect, right? And get like a human, like, yeah, here's what happened last week. You might want to check out this neighborhood that you weren't going to look at or whatever. I don't really know what law enforcement officers do all day. But if that's what they were doing, that would make sense, right? It would help them to access the data that the city has, but maybe isn't accessible from a squad car. I don't know, Gavin, you have a similar answer, but I do feel like it's about we're sort of where we sit in the software stack for an organization.
Yeah, no, I think that you covered it really clearly. The only thing would be like, you don't have to be highly technical to use City Detect, but I would say that there's different approaches that you can take. And so ours is not LLM based, so just being able to text Ordinal to like pull information from City Detect is actually a really interesting approach.
So in the scenario where a city has both City Detect and Ordinal, what does the future of city governments look like for those city governments that are adopting technology?
Yeah, so I think, right, like in 18 months, I think that more and more cities are going to have City Detect and Ordinal, and like in kind of that perfect environment, right? When you have a fleet that's outfitted with different types of camera sensors, you can say, hey, look, and if you have a natural disaster, right, you have a fire that goes through, you can say, okay, what percentage of homes got hit by the fire? And like that, you're able to ask Ordinal, which pulls information from City Detect and says, well, actually, we saw that there were 15% of homes that got hit, primarily in this neighborhood, primarily in this district, and half of them were total losses, and 15% were, really just surface damage. But it would probably only take X amount to kind of fix the entire area, right? And so you're able to get really granular with the information that you're collecting. Yeah, and I think that there's several different kind of quick types of situations like that. I mean, it could be you have a Department of Transportation litter grant, right? And you can say, all right, well, which corridors are most relevant for us to exercise this grant in? You can say, well, City Detect found 11,000 pieces of litter along this 21-mile stretch of roads, and if these are ones that are the most heavily concentrated, so we would dedicate resources there. And I think that's probably the way that a lot of cities are going to look, right? Because there's not enough manpower. If you look at a lot of different departments, there's plenty of vacancies that are around. And so as we're seeing that, we want to make sure that there's increased efficiencies so that we're able to make do with what we have. And there's oftentimes new technologies that emerge that help to kind of leverage the assets that are already in existence.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think that's
No, I agree.
I would say that's a really good example, especially because it's highlighting how what you guys have been saying this whole time, that these tools are greatly increasing the efficiency and the power of city governments, but all of the decisions and actions are still left up to the city administrators to act upon. And so I think that's a really good illustration of that as well.
Totally, and I think to just touch on what the future looks like. I mean, exactly what Gavin described makes total sense, and you could even think, right, if you have a grant that you're working toward and trying to get, right, if you had this report from City Detect and you had Ordinal and Ordinal had access to this grant, like it could sit with you and help you write and earn that grant. And the same situation, I can think of a number of places where, because you have computer vision data that tells you the state the city's in, right? If you're looking at a property and you're trying to figure out about a conditional use permit, and you can say, well, what's the condition in that region look like? I haven't really been to that neighborhood in a month or two. What are things looking like? And you can pull the data up, and then maybe Ordinal helps you like write the conditional use permit that you need to fill out, because it knows what that neighborhood looks like and what the concerns are and what sort of businesses you maybe don't want to be there based on what's going on. And all those sort of things that planners kind of take into consideration when they're doing plan reviews or talking about new businesses. And then the other thing, like the outcome of all this, I think is that cities, this is, I don't really know. I'm making a legitimate prediction here. I could be totally wrong. But I think like in 18 months in that timeline Gavin's talking about, you're going to see cities spend a lot less money on consultants around like economic development, around, planning, around code enforcement codes and ordinances. Like there's all these different consultants across the country. And a lot of cities are relying heavily on them because they can't fill staff. Like Gavin said, there's a lot of vacancies in these roles. And I think as cities become more effective with these tools and are able to work like not really larger teams, but just more efficient teams, they will likely be able to cut into that consultant budget they're currently paying and use that for projects in the city.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're getting close to time, but I have one more kind of big question that I want both of you guys to kind of touch on. Throughout the conversation, there's been kind of an underlying emphasis on using this technology can provide a social good. And I know I've seen that City Detect use the phrase AI for good. And I know Ordinal, you guys have a deep mission that is rooted in some social impact. So can you guys both talk about the larger social impact of your tools? How do they directly or indirectly, affect developers and businesses? And how can a large scale impact look like for the folks living in these cities?
Yeah, I mean, I think, go ahead, Gavin, sorry.
Jacob, please.
All right. Yeah, no, so the mission that we kind of have at the root of our company is basically just like, in a single sentence, it's developing a better society. And the way we think we do that is basically by identifying these processes that are overly complex and they produce a large number of like less than ideal outcomes that we didn't actually want from the system. And we try to make those systems and processes really simple so that the incentives are clear and everything's aligned and we get the outcome that we want. A good example is a lot of towns like the ones in my region, there's several of them are facing like serious housing shortages, enough that like the city's organizing and trying to solve these things and largely struggling because they have these competing incentives. Like we want more housing, but we don't want tall housing, or we want more of this, but we don't want that. And we want this, but we don't want that. There's these loud voices in the city, NIMBYs or YIMBYs, whichever side, that are causing problems for us. And we can't get our incentives aligned with the real estate developers who could add the housing. But if you make things pretty simple, get everyone on the same page, make it low friction to add that housing, real estate developers are capitalists and there's a housing shortage. So they will come in and they will solve your housing market issue for you by building housing. You just have to make it easy for them to comply and to see the ROI benefit of building in your community versus another. And if you get back to emails in 2 days and most cities get back in 3 weeks, you can literally calculate what it costs to put a subdivision into your home by looking at the principal that developer needs and then the number of inspection points and touch points they have with you and the average time to get back. And then you can look at the interest rate and you can say this developer is spending X dollars, which might be a very big number, to build this housing in my town. And they might choose to go down the road because that person gets back to emails faster. And like it could be that simple because for that real estate developer, it's a significant amount of lost profit to have those slow conversations. So in some ways, I think the more we make these processes streamlined, the more we align the incentives, the more outcomes that are going to be good for communities, for people that live in them, and then for the people that want to do business in them, right? We just need to make sure all the incentives are aligned and then make it easy to be on the same page.
That's a great answer. I almost forgot what the question was. But for us, right, like we believe in beautifying communities, right, and providing data equitably and objectively. And so, one of the really interesting things about it is when you're able to be a direct part of that, like litter and abatement, or litter and illegal dumping abatement, or helping to reduce the amount of blighted structures or vacant properties in a community. That's what we get really excited about, and like that's part of the reason that we use AI for good, because like the mission that we're helping to solve is to reduce urban blight and decay. Every house that's blighted within, or every house that's within 500 feet of a blighted house takes a negative 5% hit on their property value, which is a net negative for everyone, right? The homeowner loses value on their investment, and our houses are generally like our largest assets, and that's true all over the world, right? And so just making sure that we're, having this opportunity for kind of this transfer of intergenerational wealth and making sure that houses are well maintained. So that's what gets us really excited.
Yeah, that's a really good inspirational note to land on here. But the true last question is for our listeners or for people who will watch this recording afterwards, how can they get in touch with both City Detect and Ordinal?
Well, I imagine we're going to follow up with an email to the attendees, but on citydetect.com, we've got a contact us page, and we'd love to have a conversation with, people in housing, public works, or code enforcement to talk a little bit about priorities and if using City Detect is right for your community.
Yeah, and likewise, we're ordinalforgov.com, and we have a contact page there. But also, I'm insanely easy to get in touch with on LinkedIn, and anybody who's on our growth team would also be very easy to get in touch with. So, welcome to just jump right over and connect with us and message us. We'll get back to you. But it's kind of the same group of people, city planners, economic developers, probably public works, people that keep track of assets for cities, and like I said, if you have a filing cabinet or a stack of books like that in your office, I can probably help you. So I would love to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Jacob, for taking time to share your thoughts. If you're interested in getting in touch, follow up with those sources. I think we also put their contact information in the chat. And I also want to note that we have published our next webinar that will be on March 26th. It's Perspectives on the Housing Crisis, a roundtable discussion with city planners. So we'll continue on these themes of solving the housing crisis and impacting social good for the government sector. So continue on, register for that one. But thank you all for joining us today. That's all that we have for today.
Yeah, thanks everybody.